Today's lecture is going to be about the Stranahan House on New River. And I've taken some pictures and made a poster. Over here we have some posters of some of the places in Hollywood who are there no longer. The demolition crew got them. And as you can see, as always, we have a beautiful basket prepared by Valerie Tancieri. Don't forget to buy your tickets. Lindsay's around here somewhere selling them. Also, I'd appreciate it if you turn off your cell phones. And do you like interaction during the lecture?
Sure.
Or do you want
Yeah,
questions?
I'll tell them.
Okay, okay, so we don't have to wait until after the question. Alex Riccio made they made a beautiful cake at Miramar Bakery. I hope people are going there. They do such a good job. Our t-shirts are in the back, our books are in the back, our coffee cups are in the back, help us proceed this year. And I want to brag a little. This is my 10th year. Thank you. And Dr. Joan Michelson is here. We have her book for sale, and she will gladly sign it for you. Okay, so rather than yak, I'd like to introduce Missi Weinkoff-Burgess, Education and Programming Manager of the Historic Stranahan House Museum in Fort Lauderdale.
No, it's okay. Okay.
Better if we turn off the light.
All right, if you can't hear me, raise your hand. That's a joke, because if you couldn't hear me, you wouldn't know to raise your hand. My name is Missi Weinkoff-Burgess, and I work at the Historic Stranahan House. For over 35 years, I was a preschool principal, and then my spouse got stage 4 cancer, and I couldn't do the hours. I didn't know what to do with my life, and a friend of mine recommended maybe I'd downscale and not do so many hours. So I went to the Museum of Discovery and Science, and I did a whole bunch of things for them. And of course, because I'm a hyper lady, they ran out of things for me to do. So my supervisor recommended that I went to the Historic Society or the Stranahan House and see if I can get a position. And I was a little not sure if I wanted to do that, because history was not my favorite thing. I couldn't remember all the dates and all the information, but I thought I'd give it a go. So I walked in and I met Jenny Belt, my supervisor, and she was wonderful. We spent 2 hours talking, and it was great. And I didn't know if I'd be able to do it, and I have fallen in love with this place. It is such an honor and a privilege to tell people about this place and the 2 people I've learned about. So mostly I'm on property, only maybe about 2% do I go off property. So what happens is I'm going to show you a bunch of slides, tell you a bit of information, but when I go to the next slide, if you have questions, go ahead and answer them, because to be honest, it's hard to remember them later, and I get that. So the Stranahan House is the oldest structure in all of Broward County. There is nothing older than the Stranahan House. When Frank Stranahan was born, he was born in 1865 in Vienna, Ohio. And what happened is he grew up and he did what everybody else did. You do what your daddy did, or you did what everybody else in the town did. So he thought about being a Presbyterian pastor for a little while, and then he decided to work in the Youngstown Mill like everybody else in the town. When he was 23 years old, he got a horrible cough, and all his friends are like, "Frank, go to the doctor." So he went to the doctor and he said, "Hey doctor, can I have some cough medicine?" And the doctor said, "You don't have a cough. You actually have gas in your lungs, and if you don't move someplace warm, you're going to die." And if a 23-year-old hears that, of course you get scared. He's like, "Is there any medication I can take?" He said, "Your lungs are like your skin. If you do the right things, they can heal." So he moved to Melbourne, Florida, and he lived with his aunt and uncle for a little bit over 4.5 years. And they had a trading post and a lot of different things that he could help out with. He helped out with the garden, he helped out with the chores, he helped his aunt, he helped his uncle, and he enjoyed it. And he was comfortable living in a warm climate for 4 years. But then most kids, he was 27 years old and he was looking to do something different. He got a little itchy. He's like, "Hey cousin, let's go south and do something." His cousin said, "No, I am doing great. I'm building roads south and I'm making so much money. So his cousin's name was Guy Metcalf, and he told him about something they had planned to do in the very near future. It's called a ferry boat that would take people from one side of the river to the other. He said, maybe you can get a job there and I can help you out since I know the people. So Frank packed up everything he had and he moved south. He got to the New River, which is over 5,000 years old. It's just the New River's name. And he couldn't cross it. So he pitched a tent. In time, he cleared a little bit of land. He made a wood platform, pitched a tent, and he figured that'd be home for a while. On the second day, he heard noises. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm only here 2 days, and I hear noises. I'm hoping it's a pig or a turkey, something I could kill so I can have a nice meal. And he goes outside with his gun, all ready to kill something, and it was a whole bunch of Native American Seminole Indians. So of course he put the gun behind his back because he didn't want to seem aggressive, and he just went, hi! And they didn't know what he was saying, so they copied him, and they went, hi! So they all sat down by the fire, and they traded some food, had a meal together. The Seminoles left and came back in 3 days. He didn't know if he'd ever see them again, but 3 days later they came back, and what happened with them is they went hunting, and they didn't know anything about him or what he was doing, but they thought if they hunted, brought back some meat, they could all do what they did on day one and have a meeting together and just share food and gesture and enjoy each other's company. So they did. Then they left. Again, he didn't know if he'd ever see them again. 3 days later they came back, they brought him more meat, and they actually brought him animal skins, which back then we called hides. So with the hides, he tried to give it back to them saying, no thank you, I'm warm, I don't need them. But he doesn't know how to say no thank you in their language, and he's kind of like, take, and they're like, no, you take. So he ended up taking them. He didn't know what to do with them, so he ended up building a little building, and he put a little sign saying Stranahan and Company, and he turned it into a trading post. And he figured anything he didn't want, or anything he found when he was digging, he might be able to put it in there and trade, and it went fabulous. So he built a building, and it looked like this. So in 1893, the area known as Fort Lauderdale, he called it New River Camp, and he built this little, what you and I might call a shack. And he put anything he had in it, and he kept trading and trading with the Seminole Indians. They would come down the river, up to the front door where he's standing, and they would come in and trade, and then they would stand around and socialize. And it became a regular thing. Before you know it, all the Seminoles were coming from all over. I did talk to one, his name was David Rahiti Webb, and he said his family would travel 2.5 hours to come to this trading post. So word got out. The steps that you see that are closest to me, they are now where there's an icon building that's 40 stories high. But Frank used to sit on those steps, cast his fishing pole and fish. He would also get all sorts of oysters, clams, and all sorts of yumminess that he can eat. That building that has kind of a circular top that's far away from me on your right, what happens is the Seminoles would come, pull up, and put their canoes in there, and they would put their belongings in there. Because when the Seminoles came, they brought everything. They brought everything they owned. They brought their entire family. There was nothing left behind. Because they were out in the Everglades, and they never knew if it would rain too much, be too many alligators, would they be able to go back, would the government come? So when I say they brought everything, they brought everything. So each family had at least 5 or 6 canoes. They would pull them up, trade, stay and socialize, and go back. But if it was too wet or too many alligators, of course they slept overnight. So he really became an entrepreneur. It was the first business in anywhere from Miami all the way up to Melbourne. Everything else was, yes.
Did he eventually learn to speak Seminole, or how did they communicate?
Good question. So what happened is he had no desire to learn their language. He did learn some words, but they mostly learned his language. And that took time, and you'll hear about that in a couple of seconds when I get to a different slide. So he opened this trading post in 1893. Seminoles, sometimes there'd be 20 at his front door, but there's days that there'd be 100. And they would come in and trade. What you and I call feathers, or better known as plumes, different kinds of lizards, alligators, eggs. They would trade calico fabric that they made, in time beads, all sorts of things that they made. They made sweetgrass baskets, and then he would trade whatever he had, but then in 1901, he actually got the catalog, which we all know about, but when the fourth graders come, I have to explain what it is. But it was a big fat book. He could order things. And then in 1902, he got a new one, and it became Sears. Sears bought out the white catalog. And if you come on our property and you use our bathroom, the wallpaper in the bathroom is the 1903 Sears catalog. So everybody loves going to our bathroom. It's kind of cute. So Frank saw this as an opportunity. So this is what he did first. He actually acquired the land from Mary Brickell. Some of you know that name. She owned 2,000 acres in Miami, and she owned 2,000 acres in Broward. He bought 10.7 acres from her for $10.
Wow.
So for $10, he got all this land and started this great part of his life. So before you know it, where he's standing, that little corner, that niche I call it, he set up a little post office. He also opened the first bank, the first post office, the first hospital, the first white school, the first colored school, the first baseball field, the first football field. In time, he did 21 different firsts. So you can tell, Fort Lauderdale, everybody called him the father of Fort Lauderdale. So the Seminoles would come up with their canoes, pull them up these wooden steps, go in, trade, and then sit around and socialize. So it's kind of hard to see it because it's black and white, and this is from 1983. They all wore very long shirts, and the long shirts went actually all the way to their knees, and they also covered their heads. We don't know exactly, we just can assume that, of course, there was no suntan lotion, so they wanted to cover their skin. It was also extremely buggy where we were, and it was also extremely buggy out in the Everglades, so they wore like long sleeves and long shirts, to cover their skin. The Seminoles were their primary trading. That's who came first, and then in time some people would pass by, and it wasn't too much, but then in time more white people and black people came. So he traded and he traded and he traded, and it was going great. But he had no way of making money because the Seminoles didn't have money. So then he decided to work for the ferry. So he actually built one himself, and then in time built another one. And there were no, motors or anything battery operated at that time. So he got a big long stick and a pulley. And what happens is he would push off, and then the ferry would float across to the river, and then he had a rope that he would pull to get across. And then what happens is when people rang the bell, then he would pull and come to the other side. And he had a slip knot to make the rope disappear. And if you come into our house, that's what we call our museum, you will see the pulley from 1893 on Frank's desk. Everybody has their favorite things in the house, but that pulley is one of mine. So like when anybody comes in, that's one of the first things I show. Has anybody ever been to the Stranahan house for a tour? A lot of hands, okay. So in the last year, we've changed a little bit. We had the same director for 10 years, the same staff for 10 years. Then COVID came. Then on top of our tunnel, they built a new tunnel top. So we were actually shut down for 23 months. So all the staff left except for our caretaker. So then we got my supervisor who came last September, so like 2.5 years ago. Then I came in January, so I'm almost 2 years. And then my coworker came in March. So we're all pretty new. We've only been there 2.5 years. So we're kind of movers and shakers and bringing everything into the future. So what we've done, we have changed just a couple of things in the house to make it flow a little bit better. So if you come, it will look a tiny bit different, but not really. But then we got something called an audio wand. And you can actually put the wand by your ear and take a 50-minute tour. So for seniors, it's $11. It takes about 45 to 50 minutes. And I tell everybody plan for an hour, because most people like to sit on the porch for at least 10 minutes, because it's like heaven there. And I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. So now we also have it in Spanish and French, because it's on the audio wand. And we're working on grants to try to get in other languages. So these are the people I've been starting to talk about. So this is Frank Stranahan before he got married. So this is about 1897. He's about 5'5", slender-belled, or what we call a little bit skinny. Notice his pants, and he's also wearing suspenders because they didn't have belts back then. And this is Ivy, the very first school teacher of the area. He hired her with his best friend Ed King, and she came up to be the school teacher, and they got married in 1899. So that's when this whole main story begins. So what happened is he and Ed built a second floor on the house, and they built an attic on the house, and they built a water pump, and all that money came from the ferry. And what they did is the downstairs was the trading post and the upstairs was a community center, just like the room we're in now. So they would have meetings and gatherings and potluck. And just anytime anybody wanted to meet, that's where they would meet. And now there's about 42 people and 9 children. So what he did is on the most northwest part of our property, he built a schoolhouse. And then Frank and Ed went down to Little Haiti, which back then was called Lemon City, and they hired her, and she came up. She was 18 and a half years old. She taught from October to May, and then she was our first school teacher. So over here, I do have 2 pictures of her and her students. So if you do look at those pictures later, technically, it's the first class photo ever taken in the history of Broward County, because she was the first teacher. So it's pretty exciting. There is a young man to her left in the photo, a young lady, and a little boy, and that's who she lived with when she came up. They paid her $45 a month, and she lived with Ed King, wife Susan, and the 3 children that are in that picture. And she taught from October to May, and then she said goodbye to everybody. She went home for the summer to Lemon City, and she said, I'll be back up to teach. So Frank was really missing her. So what he did is in June, he went down. He went to church with her and had a picnic lunch. And then all the children gathered around and said, come back in July, we're having an ice cream social. 1 flavor vanilla. So he went back in July, and again he went to church. He had the picnic lunch, and he did the ice cream social. Spent the whole day, and at the end of the day, he got down on one knee, and he said, Ivy, will you marry me? She said no. So he came home to his best friend Ed King, who helped him build the 2nd floor of the house and the attic and other things around the property. Ed was building boxcars at that time and train cars, so he's really talented. And he's like, Ed, she said no. He goes, well, don't give up. She's gorgeous, she's smart. She's also the only person of marrying age, so go for it. So the next week, the beginning of August, he went down, got down on one knee again after church and said, Ivy Julia Camardi, I will be honored if you were my wife, and I promise to make you happy and give you a beautiful life as much as I can. I will take care of you all the days of your life. She said, I'll marry you, but I have 4 conditions. He said, great, everybody, come back in 2 weeks. We're getting married. He didn't even know what the 4 conditions are. So they came back in 2 weeks. They had the wedding at 5 in the morning. And the reason why they got married at 5 in the morning is because back then, the train came only at 6 o'clock in the morning near her house. So they had to have the wedding at 5 o'clock, jump on the train, because back then, as soon as you got married, you started your honeymoon. And they left for 3 months. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. I'll tell you. So they went on a honeymoon for 3 months. Go ahead.
So the original house trading post that you showed us, they added on to that?
Yeah, you're going to see it in my next 2 slides.
So
Yeah.
is that initial structure still exists?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And you'll see it. So what happens is, don't worry, I'm talkative, I get it all in. So they went for 3 months. First they went to Niagara Falls in Canada, because that was like the destination back then if you wanted to have a special honeymoon and spoil your sweetie. Then they went to Ohio. He had to show off his bride because he grew up in Vienna, Ohio until he was 23, so all his family and friends were still there. And then they went to North Carolina because most of her family and friends still lived in North Carolina. She got to show off her husband, and then they came home. Well, of course, if they're gone for 3 months, they had to hire another school teacher, which they did. And while they were gone, he learned about those 4 conditions. Oh my goodness, wait till you hear. And she had one for him. He had one for her. So what happened is, she said, honey, now that we're married, condition number 1 is, please shave off your goatee. No mustache, no beard. I want you clean shaven every day. I want to be able to just, feel that soft skin and not that, that goes up against my skin when you kiss me. And he did. He died at age 64, never having a beard or mustache again. On his birthday, Christmas, he was a clean-shaven man. If you come take a tour of our museum, in his office, you'll see some plumes, which you and I call feathers. She asked him to stop trading those. That was really rough on him because the plumes were worth as much as an ounce of gold, so they were worth a lot. But birds were her favorite animal, and people were plucking the feathers out and just leaving the birds to die. And birds were her favorite animals, so she got him to stop. We have a book in our gift shop that talks about that. It's The Last Secret. And then she got him to stop selling and then trading and everything that he did, coffee, tea, and alcohol.
What?
So that was a big deal, because if you think about it, vanilla extract back then had alcohol in it, and there were a lot of other things, cough syrup. So he had to take a lot of things out of his trading post, and then later on his mercantile for her, he was not able to put them in. But he did it, because he really did truly love her. He knew her well, and he was smitten by her, but then he really did fall deeply in love with her. So this is a picture of Frank's office. Notice what some of you call B-board. I don't know what that is, but I hear it all the time when you guys come for tours. It is, for us, it is Dade County pine wood. It is the strongest wood there is. It was milled down in Miami, and he went down to Miami to get it, bring it back up, and him and Ed built the outside of the house, and then when he got married, he turned it into a private home for them and put a trading post in the back. So this is Frank's office. It's kind of hard to see, but on your right-hand side, there's a shadow box of all the things he traded. On the wall, you'll see a bunch of pictures, and the picture I just showed you of Frank is on the bottom left. And this was his office, because he did 21 different businesses. Of course, he needed an office. On his desk was a typewriter. He did learn to type, but Ivy had no desire. She wrote longhand, or what you and I might call cursive. And then on the left, that's a picture in the next room. That's a Pollard. That's a game that they used to play that had 11 games on it. And then all the way top right, it's hard to see, but there were oil lamps. And that's how their whole house was, oil lamps. They did get a couple of gas lights in 1909. And then in 1915, they got electricity. And some of the things that we have in the house was their original electricity, and they're not very bright. Number one, she didn't put bright light bulbs in them so she could save a little bit of money, but it wasn't so much needed back then because you didn't have lights from everything else around. Now the Stranahan house is surrounded by all these 40-story buildings, so we need more light. So they got married in August of 1900, and then he lived till he was 64, and she lived till she was 90 years old. No, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. So this is what they call the parlor. You might call it the living room, the den, the family room, but they called it a parlor. So when you walk in, you'll see a picture of Ivy. It's kind of cut off over here. Might see it in another slide. She's 16 years old. Over the white chair, you'll see them sitting in, I call it a wicker chair bicycle, but it really is a rickshaw, but they didn't have that word back then. From their honeymoon, they came home on the train, and then they get on these little bicycles, and somebody pedaled them home. And then you'll see a sculpture of her with a Seminole Indian sitting on a couch. And the reason why that's there is because from, let's see, 1901 till 1938, on that carpet that you see, she taught Seminole Indian children. Because Frank had one condition for her. Honey, I love you, but I don't want you to work. I want you to help me with my businesses and the house and the land. And she said, okay, and after 2.5 months, she was done. She missed teaching. So she went up to the chief and she asked if she could teach the Seminole children. And the chief said she could. However, you have to follow our ways. Because you believe in a different God than I believe in, I need you to be careful. And she agreed. So for almost 37 years on that carpet that you see in that picture, she sat children down, and what she did is she taught them to read and to write and to speak English and how to grow guarded and how to deal with the white men. And she called it school. And she didn't charge anybody. She just did it out of the kindness of her heart. Of course she couldn't charge him. She promised her husband she wouldn't work. And then in 1902, she bought that piano, and she paid $15 for it. So after school each day, she would play piano for the children. And mostly what she did is she played just instrumental songs, because all the songs she knew were from church, and she couldn't play her church songs for them. So she would play instrumental songs, and they would always stay after school because they enjoyed it. And then in a few minutes I'll show you a picture, but it's cut out of this picture. When she was called out of the room, she would play a gramophone. A gramophone for you and I is a Victrola. And later on, if you want to come up, I have a picture of it close up. So all of you know what records are. This was before records. She would order a can and take the can and put it in the gramophone. She would crank it up and play music. Well, sometimes because she was Frank's wife, sometimes because she was the teacher, sometimes because she was the mother of Fort Lauderdale, she was called outside and she didn't want the children to leave. She wanted them to stay. She would crank it up and put a can in, play music and say, "Stay, I'll be right back." Well, one day she went outside and within a few minutes all the children ran after her, shaking, grabbing at her, which they don't usually touch her, so that was a big deal for her. And she's like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And they're like, "Your talking machine, talk, talk, talk." And she's like, "What?" They're like, "Your talking machine, talk, talk, talk." And she's like, "I don't understand you, I'm sorry." So she went inside, and what happened is she bought a new can, and she didn't realize it had lyrics. And it was singing. And it scared her, scared them, and to this day, it was a big deal for them to hear that. And she had to explain it, but she didn't even know. She didn't know that you could buy cans with lyrics. So it's kind of fun, and our gramophone still works. She actually won it when she was 17 years old. It plays a little bit squeaky, but it's still in the house. She truly loved it because it played music, and music was a passion of hers. But she also loved it because it had hand-painted flowers on it, and if you come up, you'll see. It's anything hand-painted was her love. Hand-painted plates or lights or anything. She really, really loved it. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So they got married, came home, and they lived in a tent together. And then he built like a little structure, like a little tiny cabin, and they lived there for a few more years when he turned the trading post into their private home. So the window behind Ivy was a straight window, like a store. He took it out and he put a bay window. In the office he put a bay window because it's prettier. It looks like a home. And then he also added, lace curtains and all the special things. This woman's name is Annie Reed. Everybody called her Mother Reed. She came to work for Ivy in 1911 to help her because by then Frank had so many different businesses and there was so much going on the 10.7 acres of land. She needed help. So Mother Reed would help her with the laundry, with the Seminoles, just about anything around the property that Ivy was supposed to do, she would help her. And then Ivy started fighting for causes and laws and things that she wanted, and then Mother Reed would take over everything so Ivy could do a little bit more fighting. For instance, she started the Historic Society, she started Campfire Girls, she started 11 different things. And then in 1922, Mother Reed asked if she could have a little piece of their property, and they agreed, and they sold it to her for $10. And then she opened what was called Dillard School for the Colored. Colored meant Asian, Mexican, Spanish, blacks, even maybe me. I'm a kayaker. I'm never white, white, white. I'm always a little bit tan. So I would have to go to the colored school because I wasn't white, white, white. It opened in 1924, so she actually left Ivy and went to work at the school, helping it grow and finding it children in any way she could help. Cleaning, the rooms, whatever she could do. When she worked for Ivy, she was paid $3 a week. So that was a big deal, I think. But what for me was the biggest deal is we saw her checks from Frank, and they were checks. I didn't know people wrote checks all those years ago. I would assume she would have gotten $3 in cash. And back then they didn't really use dollars, it was mostly coins. So I would assume that she would have gotten like a sack of coins. No, she was given a check, and there's a picture of it in our house when you come to see it. So Old Dillard is now a museum that you could tour, but there is a school called Dillard. And of course, a couple years later, it became segregated. That was really, really important to Frank and Ivy when that happened. Everybody's equal. No matter who you are, where you grew up, what religion, what faith, it was very important to them that everybody was treated equal. So they were really happy when everything got segregated. There is a picture of her and this house and everything in our parlor. This is Ivy's kitchen. Frank added it on in 1906. The stove was wood burning, and then in 1909 he turned it into a gas stove, and then it fell apart. So this is a replica, but it's exactly what it looked like. That's her ice box. She would leave some coins on top next to that little mug, and she would leave like about 15 or 20 cents. Then the Iceman would come in every 4 days, and he would leave her 20 cents worth of ice. It went on the right-hand side, and it kept everything on the left-hand side cold. All the way closest to me, that funny-looking thing, was her toaster. And we know it's one of the original toasters, because back then toasters had butterfly doors to keep it warm, and this one doesn't. Basically, you would cook your toast, spin it around, and cook the other half. The big blue thing is to sift flour. As you can see, there's an oil lamp up top. There's a butter churn. Ivy did not have children, so it was her job to make the butter, the jelly, the soap, the pies, everything. She didn't have children to help her, so thank goodness for Mother Reed for those couple of years that she had her, like a decade. On the right, it's kind of hard to see, but that was where she did wash. On top of the stove, she had her irons that would get hot, so she spent a lot of time in this kitchen.
She never had children.
Now, Ivy never had children, and she was the oldest of 12. She helped her mom deliver all the babies that came into the, right. So 6 lived to be adults, counting Ivy. 1 died at 5 months, 1 died at 3 months. 1, as she was delivering it, it was dead. And the last one had like the cord wrapped around its neck, so Ivy froze. And her mom's like, give me the baby, give me the baby, give me the baby. And she just froze. So we're not sure, but we feel like Ivy feels it might have been her fault that that baby died. So we're not really sure if it's she had enough because she was the oldest of 12 and helped her mom with all that, or if she didn't have a desire. We don't know, because we've read a lot of her letters and we didn't see it in there. But Frank didn't want children. He was 16 years older than her. He had 10.7 acres of land. He was doing so much. So they agreed when they got married that they would not have children. And she was really okay with that. She really just wanted to teach them. So she taught the Seminoles after she got married, all the way up to 1938. And there were Seminoles constantly in the house, sitting on that carpet that you saw. And that fulfilled her. Later on, when Frank died, they put the Pioneer House restaurant, and I'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes, around it. She didn't have her kitchen anymore, and I'll get to that. So what happens is she would eat in the Pioneer House restaurant, and when she was done eating, she would kind of make a motion to somebody who worked there. They would get all the children, put them in front of her, and she would read them books and tell them stories. And that again fulfilled her. She just loved loving other people's children and giving them back. But in the restaurant, she just loved having all the children come over and spend about 15 minutes with her, which was great for all the parents, because then they could have a 15-minute break from their children. So what happens is, Frank died. He took his life. He actually put a rope around his waist with a 70-pound grate, and right in front of what we call our house, you would call a museum, he jumped in the river. It was 75 feet deep, and he went down. And there was a white family, a black family, an Olympic swimmer. There were some Seminoles, and they all jumped in after him and got him. But nobody knew what we know now, CPR or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. They actually put him on a big barrel and pushed on him to get the water out of him, but he died. There was a 3.5-year-old girl who said, it was a great big barrel and they were pushing on him hard. I'm sure it was a regular barrel, but she was 3.5. And her son now is the vice president of our board. So we got that story right in from him. So he died because he didn't want to be a burden. What happened is he got diagnosed with a hernia, he got diagnosed with cancer, and he did the first treatment, but he didn't want to do any more treatments. He didn't want to be a burden for Ivy. So he took his life, and she lived in this house for 42 years without him. She did have a niece that visited him, her often, and she died 2 years ago, May, so about 2.5 years ago. Alice did visit often, but Ivy had to take care of everything without Frank for the rest of her life, and she died in this house, and I'll tell you more about that. This is Ivy's dining room. Basically what happened is her and Frank would eat. There was a little nook in the kitchen. They would have breakfast there and dinner there. Lunch was, grab a piece of fruit and keep moving. But if they had her sister or brother over or some company, they would eat in the dining room. The dishes that are farthest to your right, those were her everyday dishes. And then above it were hand-painted dishes. And of course now you can see the gramophone, the one I was just telling you about. So upstairs was a community center. It was just 4 walls, like this room is, and that's where they would have meetings and gatherings. But when they decided to get married and Ed and Frank turned it into their home, This became one of the guest rooms. We nickname it the sewing room because it's easier for us than saying guest room number 1 and guest room number 2. On the back wall, you'll see pictures of Seminoles. Those are from 1893. Up top is Annie, and the bottom is Johnny. In the hallway, we have pictures of Charlie and another Annie. The woman on top was one of the most important ladies in the Seminole clan back in 1893 and 1894. Every time she moved up, they gave her a necklace. And when you come in, you can see they were all beaded. But the beads back then were glass. So could you imagine wearing necklaces? It looks like a turtleneck, but it's actually beaded necklaces all the way up. And there's a twist in them, so that means at one point she became the medicine woman. The gentleman below her, he was the only Seminole that we can tell that didn't wear a hat. Remember in the beginning I said they all wore a hat and long sleeves? What he would do is every day he would wake up and he'd roll up his bedroll and put it on top of his head. So that was his bedroll. And the pipe, a lot of times we saw pictures of it in his hand, not his mouth. We're not sure if he was a chain smoker or it was like to help keep the bugs away. But we do have some nice pictures of the Seminoles that used to visit the house. Then you can see a mirror under him. A lot of ladies would put a mirror on a dresser and then they put their perfume and different things on it. I know my great-grandma did that. We have it kind of standing up so everybody could see it, but in front of it is a wood thing, which is called the stereograph. You would put your photos in it, the glass is magnified, and that's how you looked at pictures back then. Then on the right, you'll see her 1896 white sewing machine. They paid $3 for it out of the catalog. It took 10 months to come. So what happened is they had to, take it, put it in a piece of furniture, then they had to put it in a crate, then they shipped it down on a stagecoach, then there was a mule, then there was a boat. It took 10 months to get there. So you have to see when the 4th graders come to visit us. If today was my birthday, and it's January 12th, then in 2 months my mom would have to order my present for when I'm in 5th grade. You don't even know what you want in 5th grade because you haven't finished 4th grade. So that's how they understand it. On the right-hand side, you'll see some Seminole clothing. Frank and Ivy taught the Seminoles to sew. And to this day, if you go to any of the powwows or see them around, they're wearing what we call patchwork jackets or vests. And they tell a story. So I can go up to all of you and say, have you always lived in Florida? What kind of work did you do? At what age did you retire? How many children do you have, right? We can learn about each other. You can learn that I have 4 children and they're married and now I feel like I have 8 children and 6 grandchildren and we can go through the whole story. With the Seminoles, you just walked up and read their clothing. So the piece on the left, it's kind of blurry, but it's like green and white triangles. That means mountains. At the bottom, there's something that looks like a T, upside down T, T, upside down T. It's like blue and orange. That meant club, like a club that you would hit somebody over the head, or it meant trees. So if I'm seeing mountains and club or mountains and trees, you know what that means to me? He didn't grow up in Florida because we don't have any mountains. The piece on the right, I can tell that that person's mom was a Seminole, but the dad wasn't. So he grew up in a mixed marriage. That's a big deal back then. Ladies were in charge of the Seminoles. The men would do all the talking, but the ladies would be talking into their ears. Kind of like our life, right? Us ladies are in charge of our house, right? So, like I learned about that person, and it also has a lot of gold on it. So that means that person probably did grow up in the state of Florida because they grew up in a very sunny place. This is what she called bedroom number 2. We nicknamed it Albert's room because her brother would stay in this room very often. Now, it's kind of hard to judge from this picture, but the bed is smaller than a twin bed. Because back then, children were, and adults, everybody was smaller. Nobody was tall, nobody was wide because you just basically ate 2 meals. You really didn't eat lunch. You'd grab a piece of fruit or something. And you didn't snack like we snack now. I mean, the big pretzels are my favorite. They didn't even have those in America yet. They had them in Germany, but not for us yet. On the bottom, those are Ivy's shoes. They are a high heel. We have 4 pair of her shoes, and they lace all the way up. And these are the shoes that she wore to work. She had a different pair she wore to church. She would wear her work ones and walk all the way to the beach, 2.5 miles, swim in the ocean, and walk back. And I can't imagine wearing high heels and walking 2.5 miles, but she did it. She was about 5 feet, and then, like the rest of us who shrunk, she shrunk down to 4'11". On the dresser, you'll see all the things that a lady might use, or a gentleman. It has a hook that they would hook their spats over their shoes. It has brushes, it has mirrors. It has this little round pot that you would take the hair out of your hairbrush and put it in. The suspenders aren't there now, they're in a different room, but now they're back into that room. It had a pair of suspenders, so we could teach the children that back then they didn't wear belts and they wore suspenders. And then on the dresser to your right, we have a Meisner purse. It's purses that the Seminoles would make, and it was a way that you could carry your coins. It looks like a fanny pack, but it's not. It's called a Meisner purse. But when the children see it, they're like, it's a fanny pack. I'm like, yes, the Seminole Indians made it before whoever made fanny packs. This is Ivy's master bedroom. And that oval picture is Annie Beck. I don't know if anybody know who she is. She was the first woman pharmacist in our area. She was also Ivy's best friend. You can go to Annie Beck's house, but it's not like our house. You can't go inside. You could just walk around outside and see the grounds. And then on the bottom, there's something that looks like tan with holes in it. That was her gas heater, because she was a skinny little thing. It helped her stay warm. They didn't have closets because closets were considered rooms, and you pay taxes on how many rooms you had, so they had what you might call a bureau or an armoire, so that's where she would hang her clothes. And then over the piece of furniture, there's a picture of her wearing white. That's her wedding day. She was 18 and a half years old. In that basket that's under, you'll see we have her Bible and her watch. So when you come to the house, you'll see all these great things that we have of Ivy's. In the winter months, Ivy would go upstairs and sleep in the attic, and she rented out her room, the sewing room, and Albert's room like an Airbnb. She called it the Water Edge Inn, but what happened is her husband's gone, and she needed money, and how could she make money if she promised her husband she wouldn't work? So she had to get creative. So she rented out the 3 bedrooms, and people would come in the winter, which was great for her. It was social. It was also helping the restaurant. And it was wonderful. So in a couple of minutes, if I have a picture here, I'm not sure in here, I'll have to check. But she would go up these skinny little stairs. She would sleep up there. She had a chamber pot if she needed to go. She'd come down in the morning, clean out her chamber pot, leave it at the bottom of the steps because she'd only go up once a day because they were very steep. In 1915, Frank built her a bathroom. It was the first time she had an indoor bathroom, so she was in this house for 16 years before she got one. She has what we call a 3/4 tub. It's small. She had a sink, and she had one of those toilets with the thing on top and then you'd pull. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is Ivy and Frank, and they were sitting in the garden. They did both love to read. They did both love their quality time. They didn't get it too much because they were always so busy. They did, as they both got older, wear round glasses, because that's all you had back then is one shape, round. She wore bifocals, he did not, but she wore one of the first bifocals that came off the line. Every picture we have of Frankie's not smiling. I'd like to go back and say, could you do me a favor and just smile once? He was a serious man. He was a man always thinking about what business he was going to do next. But he loved his Ivy. He loved New River Camp, which you and I call Fort Lauderdale. It became Fort Lauderdale in 1911. And he was a church-going man. She was a church-going lady, but they did go to 2 different churches. In the beginning, there was only one church, so they had to go together. But then he ended up going to the one that he felt closer to his heart, and she went to the one closest to her heart. And when she died, she left the house to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then the Historic Society bought it, and we opened as a museum in 1984, and we started doing field trips in 1986. I'm kind of hyper and talkative. 2.5 years ago, they would have 700 children come every year for field trips, and they were very happy with that. 700 children are seeing this building. I've gotten it up to 2,800 children. I'm wearing out all my volunteers, all the staff, my 85-year-old caretaker, but I love showing it because I moved here in 1988. I went on every boat that you've been on, the Carrie B and the Jungle Queen and the water taxi. And they always say, that's the Stranahan house, the oldest structure in all of Fort Lauderdale, and it has Ivy, the first school teacher. They never said you could take a tour of it. So now I'm trying to be bold and tell everybody, come take a tour. Seniors are 11, adults are 13, college students are 10, children are 8. It's affordable. Also, people rent us out for parties. We do 50th wedding anniversaries, 50th reunions for school. We do all sorts of things. Yeah. Last week I did one. It was all the lawyers and the judges that had to do with their bankruptcy attorneys. And as they were leaving, they're like, oh my God, this place is amazing. I never saw it. Well, that night I only showed them the first floor. So I said, well, now you got to come back and see the second floor. If you go out our property, our front door faces the river, because everybody used to come to us via the river. It's not on a road. If you look to our right, which we would all call west, that's where the Seminoles would come from, come up to our front door and trade. And what happens is, it went really well, and then before you know it, it became a community place where people would stay in the inn, and then in time, they built the Pioneer Restaurant surrounding it. So over the years, people have different memories of it. There's a very young lady here who remembers going to the restaurant that we had on the property, and she was telling me about the rolls. Well, everybody who comes to visit me tells me how amazing the rolls are at our Pioneer House restaurant. When Ivy died, it was left to the church, then the Historic Society turned it back into the museum. What happened is, we took off the restaurant, put back on the porch. The porch was 100-year-old wood. Recently we had to do it again, because you know how wood is. But again, we used 100-year-old wood. But see those 3 steps? We actually raised the platform because of king tide and everything else. The water was getting too close to the house. So now there's only 1 step into the house. But this is what it would look like all those years ago. This is what the town would look like. Frank opened the first store that you and I would call it, that exchanged money. He called it the Mercantile. Excuse me. These buildings were considered tall. Ha ha ha. Now all around me is 40-story buildings. This is what the river looked like, where people would come and purchase things, and this is where things came. You didn't get things from a truck, from a street, you got it from the water. This is Ivy in her younger days. She always dressed classy, always dressed pretty. She was slender. She was about 5 feet. She was always in small heels. And you always saw her just, like you and I would say, put together well. Her given name was Ivy Julia Camardi, and then when she got married, she became Stranahan. Frank and her decided not to have children, so she has nephews, but they didn't have children. So her nephews had boys, who then had boys, and now one of them finally had a little girl. And there is a new little girl in our world, and she comes to visit us. She's 3.5 years old, and her name is Ivy Stranahan. And when she comes on the property, all of us stop working, and we just all stare at her and just watch her, because it's just a special treat to have her. She comes when Santa Claus is there. She comes when we have children's, things there. And I don't know that they've told her about her great-great-aunt Ivy, but I can't wait till she learns about her. But it's such a special treat for us to have this young lady on the property. This is how they would dress back in the day. A lot of white and tan shirts, long skirts, high heels. These are Seminoles that would come and trade. Those are Seminole twins. They were so excited to see something that they never saw before, better known as a bicycle. On the right, this is how the Seminoles would come to us. They would chop down a tree, make a canoe, use a long pole, and then come to trade. They would wear turbans or hats and long shirts. This is Ivy by her schoolhouse with some of her students. And as you see, she's teaching school, but you can see how she's dressed. Ivy believed every single person, no matter who you were, was entitled to a good quality education, whatever you wanted to learn. So if you were interested in farming, she would teach you farming. If you wanted to learn about sewing, she would teach you that. You wanted to learn about cooking, that's what she would teach you. This is 2 of them right after they got married. Can you turn the lights back on? Thanks. So what I've brought with me is, I brought a bunch of pictures. There is Frank and Ivy and the school. I've also brought a couple of flyers. Most people who I saw raise their hand, you probably could tell somebody that we do tours, but we also do events. We used to do events every month, but June and July we keep getting rained out and it's too hot. So now we do events 10 months of the year. So on February 7th, we're doing a speakeasy. It's an hour and a half. It's $25. Everybody gets a free drink with it. And we all dress 1920s. And we have a gentleman named Randy J. He's coming to speak about Prohibition times. He has his book if you want to buy it, but you don't have to. Every March and every October, we do a craft fair. There are so many people out there that are so talented and they make crafts, But these days, a lot of the places that they want to sell it at charge a fortune. We only charge $30. They come and they sell their product. We do keep it cheap because people have to pay for parking in Fort Lauderdale, unfortunately, but it's something affordable. So if you know anybody crafty, we're looking for vendors for March 1st and October 4th. Up here, I have pictures of different things that I've brought. On the other one, I have my business card. And even if you don't want to take the flyers, you can always take a picture of it, because that's what I do. I don't like taking 100 pictures at home. On that table over there, I have a couple of things that you guys would probably remember. I'm going to show them to you. Give me a second. On our property, we have a bell from 1893. It is taller than me, taller than most people in this room. Every child who comes on the property gets a chance to ring it. This is how you would ring it to get across the water. So when I go and speak and I can't have the children come to me, I go to them. I let them ring my little bell. Gentlemen remember putting shaving cream on with something like this. The children all wonder what this is. I'm like, give me guesses. If you heard what they had to say, they thought it was a brush for a horse, a brush for a cat. I'm like, this is how men put shaving cream on. They're like, why? I'm like, well, he had to shave every day. This is how he put shaving cream on. Ivy had a lot of basins, all different sizes. It was to help her do wash. It was help her to wash up. And they're all over the house, so we show the children them and we explain what they are. In Albert's room, we have all sorts of wooden toys. We explain to the children that toys back then were either cast iron or wooden. And we have a bucket of wooden toys and we let them play with it. And you have to see them. I'm like, they didn't have batteries. They didn't have anything that can plug in. There was no TV. There was no computer. Our caretaker came to us. His name is John. Let's see. Personally, don't tell him I said this. I find him very handsome. He came at 17 years old. He met Ivy. He would deliver things to her. He'd come and talk to her. She once went to his high school and she spoke. And then he would come and visit her. And then he'd help out the caretaker a little bit. And then they hired him every Monday to help the caretaker wash the house and wash the windows because he hated doing it. And John loved doing it for his Ivy. Well, now he's been our caretaker full-time for 36 years. We can't get him to work less hours. We can't get him to retire. I tell him to go home at 5 o'clock, and he never listens to me. He stays late. But if you ever come on the property, John is there every day but Monday and Thursday. And if you come, you're going to have to put a lot of money in that parking meter because he doesn't stop talking. He's even more talkative than me. Up here, I just have different pictures of the house in different stages. I also have my business card. You are welcome to take a picture of it and take it. Feel free to ask me any questions, email me anything that you might have thought when you've left here, or if you want to come with a group one time and say, is this day or this time work out for you? I do all the education for the children. I do the education for the adults. I do the programming. I'm in charge of all the volunteers. So when in doubt, most of the questions I can answer or help you with. This is the one I'd love you to take a picture of. Or there's some papers over there. This is about the speakeasy and the craft fair. But this is the picture I was telling you about. This is the first class photo ever taken in the history of Broward County. Ivy earned $45 a month. She lived with this boy, this girl, and this boy, paying their daddy $15 for room and board, and then she would send the other $30 to her dad to help take care of her siblings. One time she kept $15 for herself. What did she buy? The piano.
Was the piano new?
How did she get her
used piano? You don't know.
She bought it new. It was called a wheel lock. She purchased it in 1902. We do something called Victorian Christmas, and every Victorian Christmas we have a woman named Alice, and she comes and plays it for us. I think she's 83, and she plays it 6 nights for us. And sometimes when somebody comes in and they say they play a piano, I'm the first to roll it up, tell them to make sure they get any oil or dirt off their hands and play it, because we love to hear it played. Ivy loved to teach, but her daddy was a farmer. So farming was a big part of her. Her dad also loved music, so music was a part of her. There was always music in the house between her gramophone and later on a record player, but they would have anytime somebody said, I play the violin, I play the cello, she would invite them to her house to play. On last Saturday night, the bankruptcy group came, and there was a violinist who played for 3 hours. Ivy would have loved that. It was a unique looking violin. The woman sang all sorts of types of music from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Ivy would have loved knowing that that woman was on her porch. There are 7 people who have passed away on our property, part of the house. People constantly ask me if our house is haunted. And you know what I say to them?
Yes.
No. Now go on the website and read all about it, because my IT girl put it there. We're not haunted. We used to do ghost stories for entertainment and fun, but we're not haunted. Because the 7 people who did die, died happily. And who knows what happens afterwards, but I'm there at 6 in the morning sometimes, and I'm there at midnight, and I've never seen anything. But that's a question people ask me all the time. Did they have children, and is the house haunted? There was a 7-year-old Seminole girl who died in the house. And the Seminoles would come in the house during the day, but never at night. The top of their head needed to be seen by the sky, by their spirit and their God. So what they did is they took her body and they put it right near a door and laid it until the Seminoles could come the next day for her. And then they opened every window in the house and every door in the house to have like the fresh air come in. And the Seminoles were happy with how they handled it, that they didn't put her outside, and they understood why, but they gave her the fresh air and her body could see the stars. Frank took his life, his choice. Her mom didn't die at the house, but her dad did. He was in his 80s. She caretaked him the last year of his life. She was like his caretaker. He died happy, and he was in his 80s, and he died in peace in the Sun Parlor, which is now our gift shop. She also was reading books and writing letters, and she died in the same room. So everybody died peacefully. But those are the 2 questions I get all the time, so now I just give that as part of my spiel. What can I tell you about Fort Lauderdale or Ivy or Frank? What can I tell you?
Her family was at King Camaraderie. Don't they have a house by the New River?
Yes. So if I'm at the Stranahan house and I'm standing in the door, straight across the water was the King Camardi house. So her brother, Camardi, married Louise King, who's in this picture. They got married. They called it King Camardi House. It was right across the river from us, what you would think like your neighbor across the street. But in 1979, they lifted it, put it on the river, floated it down to the Historic Society. They also did that to her schoolhouse and other buildings on our property, so now everything is at the Historic Society. But they couldn't lift our house to add it because he built it in 1893, finished it in 1901, added on it in 1906, added on steps, a bathroom, and the Sun Parlor in 1915, and then he did no construction after that. So we're from 1893 to 1915, and the way he added on, it couldn't be lifted up. Maybe now with modern technology you would be able to. Well, we don't want to. Because at the Historic Society, they got to take care of all those buildings. I just have to take care of one. Yes?
I have 2 questions. Did you say that this is the oldest building in Fort Lauderdale or Broward County?
Broward County.
Oh, it is Broward. Okay.
So when he started building this building, there was a little bit in Miami, and then from Melbourne all the way up to Jacksonville. But from Melbourne to Miami, there was nothing. It was just trees and bushes. That's all there was. There were no structures. This was the first structure between that. So I don't know if any of you know that, but from like where Melbourne was all the way to the Keys, it was all Dade County. And then they started giving smaller areas a name, like West Palm Beach. Broward was the last to get its name. Next question.
I'm just curious, when you said earlier that the Seminoles didn't actually have cash, but he was ordering stuff out of a catalog, presumably to give to the Seminoles.
Correct.
How
So-
was that compensated?
So what happened is the Seminoles traded and traded and traded, and then he built the ferry, and from the ferry he got money. So in time, then him and the Seminoles started trading for money. And they still called it trading, but then in time they called it the mercantile shop, and they could shop and they got money. But the way he got money is from the ferry. He did have some money that he brought with him because he worked for his aunt and uncle, so he had some money. That's how he bought the land. But back then everything was like 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents, right? But he charged 25 cents if you wanted to get on that ferry. So that was a lot of money. So he built the second floor, he built the attic, he built the water pump, and that's how he got his money. And except for the gentleman in this room and the ladies, you were all 25 cents. But the one behind the camera, he was 30 cents. You know why?
Because I'm a minority?
No, because you had your horse with you and your horse was an extra nickel. So you had to pay 30 cents to get on Frank's Ferry. But if you had one of those little stagecoaches and you needed to get across the water, he charged you 60 cents. I mean, really, you took up a little bit more space, but he got 60 cents. That was a lot of money. Who else can I answer a question for?
I'm curious about the Seminoles and the relationship with the Stranahan. How is today? What's that like?
So, there are a lot of Native Americans. There's different tribes and different clans. When they come, first of all, we get so excited because they're a part of our history. We like knowing what they like, hearing, and we like hearing what they have to say. On Frank's desk, there's a book. It only goes N through Z, but it has all people's names who traded. So like when the Osceolas or the Jumpers and the Billies come, I'm like, I know what your great-great-grandparents used to like. So for us, it's fun. We tell them stories, they tell us stories, we show them pictures, we trade information. I go to the powwow every year. There isn't a year I can remember missing the powwow. No matter what's going on in my life, it's on my calendar for the next year. And we have a great relationship with them. When I say that I work at the historic Stranahan house, I forget the name, it's a Seminole name. They're like, oh, you work for? And they think I work for Ivy. I don't tell them any differently because I feel like I work for her. But they want to hear stories all the time, and I love hearing their stories. It's a great relationship. And I remind them that it was very important for Frank and Ivy to see us all as equal. There is no difference. There was not a drop of prejudice in their bones. Question? Go ahead.
What's that powwow you were talking about? What is it?
So, many states have a powwow once a year or once every 2 years or once every 3 years. And it's for all the, whatever they are, like the Miccosukee or the Seminoles to get together. They dance, they sing, they make their food. They have what you and I might call like a flea market. So at the Hard Rock, they have one. All the big rooms in the Hard Rock are totally filled with people selling stuff. And then all the hallways. So even if you don't want to buy anything, it's pretty neat to go see what they make and what they're trying to sell. When I went 3 years ago, I went and I tried to collect business cards because I wanted to get everybody to come to my craft fair. It was hard for me to find somebody at the powwow who actually lived in Florida. They come from all over the United States to sell their jewelry and their leather goods and their clothing and everything that they make. And some things are, more modern, but they still bring in, wampum belts and all the neat things they do. And what you guys call moccasins, they call makis. They bring their makis, and I don't always buy a lot, but I have so much fun walking up and down the aisle seeing everything. And then in the auditorium, from about 10 in the morning to about 5 in the afternoon, they take turns and there's a list. They do their dance. They do the snake dance and the alligator dance, and everybody can watch their dance. And you see the most gorgeous outfits and colors and how they dress. And they mostly dress when they're entertaining. They just wore long shirts back then and hats because, that's how things were then.
They have it, is there any advertising about it?
I don't know. This year it is January 31st, that weekend. And you can go on Friday and Saturday, I recommend. There is what you and I would call a food court. They set up a food area where they sell all sorts of food. And people go and they buy food, and maybe there's 6 people online. But for the fry bread, you usually have to wait an hour online. And it is the best fry bread ever. So every culture, everywhere makes a bread, and they do something different with it, And for them, they make one and they put powdered sugar on it. But some people put diced apples on it, and some people put other things on it. I just get it with the powdered sugar. But every year I go for the fry bread and just to walk around and see what they make. I enjoy it, and I just try to meet a different Seminole. David Rahiti is a Seminole I've known for 5 years from the other museum I used to work at. He wrote a book, and what happens is I mail him books right before the powwow. He signs them in his language that says thank you, and then he puts his name, and he brings them to me, and we sell them in our gift shop. And he tells about his family. My favorite story he tells is it took 2 hours and 45 minutes to get to our trading post, which then was a mercantile that you could exchange money. He came with his parents, his grandparents, and his great-grandparents. Great day. They go inside to trade because it's their turn. and great-grandma Pearl disappeared. She was gone for like 20 minutes. He said it felt like forever, but he was 3.5 years old. And when she came back, she had a little bit of blood on her cuticles, and everybody said, you know, Pearl, where have you been? She goes, oh, I went out to the woods and delivered a baby. There's another Seminole.
Oh, my God.
David is so mad at himself that he didn't learn that baby's name because that would have looked good in his book. But like the books that we keep in our bookshop are like books that you guys have here are things that pertain to us. A speaker that's come to us, a Seminole that's come to us, somebody who's affiliated with us. Susan Gillis, who's our main historian. Bill Sidner, who writes stories all about Ivy and Frank in our area. And we have David's Seminole book. His next book's coming out soon, and I'm like, David, I love you, but I'm not having your second book. He goes, why? I said, because it's $50. I can't afford a $50 book. He goes, but it's a great book. I'm like, great, give me one. What else can I tell you?
Yeah, question. As far as electricity, you said that the house was actually wired in 1938 or so?
15 at the end of 1915.
1915. Okay, where was that power coming from?
So what happened is, in the beginning, it was just Frank, and then more and more people started staying. There was a black family who came in 1894. It was their job to go from West Palm Beach all the way to Key West, putting down the railroad tracks, and then Mr. Flagler brought us the train. So more and more people started staying and coming, and it became a big community. In 1926, it was a very large community. Things were going well. We had everything. And then the hurricane came. And what was left was the Bonnet House, the inn, our house, and a couple things made out of cement. The cars were gone. The trees were gone. Everything was gone. Frank took all his money and built up the town. But the town was up and coming. But they did have, the Iceman came every 4 days to them. They got electricity the end of 1915. I don't know how it came in, but everywhere electricity started coming. And then he also, at the end of 1915, they got what I call spigots or faucets. They got indoor plumbing. So really 1915 was like an exciting year. He got a staircase indoors, because there was only one outside. They added on the bathroom, the sun parlor. He got electricity, he got plumbing, and she could actually take a bath instead of washing up with a little pitcher and basin. It was a big year for them, 1915. So our house was hit by Category 5 in 1926. It was the worst hurricane on record, except for that one that we had like a year and a half ago, Ian, that hit Fort Myers. But before that one, it was the worst one on record. Second worst one on record was 1928. They were Category 5s. We got about this much water in the house, and there is a door that has a watermark. And it's amazing how they survived it. But it's the way Ed and Frank built the house out of the Dade pine wood, and the way they constructed it, snapping it together, kind of like Legos, that it stayed standing. Any other questions? Well, come up if you want. Take pictures of what I have here. If you want, take a picture of my card.
I'm ready for this one.